And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage born free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradionetwork.com, and a shout out to our old site with all the, we'll call it Coalition 1.0 and 2.0, our pre-digital days at coalitionradio.us. Well, there are troubling issues all over America right now. The notion that we were looking, all of us, at a courthouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin last night, and seeing, if you will, it almost portrayed as perhaps a nation in the Eastern Bloc or Latin and Central America, the center of government, if you will, under siege by protesters. Seeing that is one of the most disturbing things that I've seen in my life on a political level. You know, it's heartbreaking to see in the small towns across the country the same type of abuse of power that was once reserved for the extreme situation, the big cities, the New Yorks, the LAs, the Baltimores. And then we see the universality of that. And we also get to we see the universality of what's going on in our schools. And the same conversation is being held around the nation. What do we do about our schools? What do we do about our children? What do we do about safety? And the same conversation is being held around the nation about what to do about our business sector. How do we continue to simply keep people moving, surviving, not even thriving anymore, surviving in an era when our business community has been essentially crippled around the nation? And then we look at the challenges internationally, and it's a wonder that most of us aren't at this point in some sort of fetal position at home, just ready to cry. All of those issues are resonating right here in Rhode Island. And the one that we're going to talk about really the most tonight, we may have a dalliance, if you will, with some of the other issues, of course, is about our school system. Our school systems here in Rhode Island, despite the best efforts of a lot of talented teachers, have been under siege for generations. This may be the proverbial final straw. I don't know. If you were at or listened to or had a chance to watch the video of the governor's press conference the other day, I attended on a weekly basis. I try to participate. I try to ask questions that push the envelope. You would have walked away with a sense of wonderment because of the hallucinatory nature, if you will, of the pipe dreams that have infiltrated Rhode Island government. Someone who's joining us tonight is now officially a repeat offender on the show. This is her third appearance. Stephanie Muse joins us, of course. She is intimately involved with the safe reopening of Rhode Island schools. She's involved with a social media group that claims over 15,000 Rhode Islanders from virtually every walk of life. And we've had the opportunity to talk for a few times. Monday at the press conference was the first time I saw her, if you will, in the flesh, speaking to the crowd passionately. A crowd that was looking to go inside into a press conference where we would be put to sleep again with the soft whisperings that everything's going to be okay. And if you just do what we say, things will work out fine. And the passion that Stephanie and her fellow protesters have for this is remarkable. Because on one level, they're intimately involved as teachers. They know the children, they know the parents, they know the families. And at the same time, they're part of this overwhelming bureaucracy called education in Rhode Island. And it's a troubled bureaucracy. And to see folks advocating so fiercely for children and families and teachers was ennobling, because for many years, all of those people were the forgotten ones. We were involved with the school systems in the state that seemed to regard children and families as sort of a necessary inconvenience to have around to justify the existence of the mother of all bureaucracies in here at Rhode Island, the mother of all profit centers for an entire educational industry that pervades Rhode Island. So, Stephanie, I want to welcome you back to the show, and I want to congratulate you and your group's efforts. You've seen now firsthand the challenges at stake here, and your unwillingness to back down is remarkable, and I applaud that. And I want to welcome you back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me back, Pat. I appreciate your willingness to speak with me again, despite my tenacity.
Well, you know what? This is going to be a recurring issue on our little network here for some time to come. We are going to not go gently into that good night, as they say. We are not going to allow this to be forgotten in the next wave of PR efforts. It's just simply too important. It's really the only thing we've got left to work for in the state at this point are the children. So let's do kind of a refresh. Go back a little bit, get a little bit of background feedback, but let's go back to the very beginning. Your classrooms were essentially evacuated last March. If folks visited classrooms in some schools in March, April, and May, it was almost eerie. It was as if almost some bomb had dropped and something out of, I don't know, Walking Dead or something, where all of a sudden you had these shell, and you had people who literally left, with their papers and their personal belongings still as if they were, on a March morning.
When I went back to the classroom, there were still sweaters on desks, water bottles on desks. The date on the board was still March 13th or whatever the date was. It was really eerie to return back to school.
Which, of course, begs the most important question right away. We're not even building up. We're not burying the lead here. If, in fact, those classrooms haven't been touched, they in a sense resemble a museum to a rather ignorant, a difficult date here in Rhode Island. What does that say? Is that a metaphor for everything we're doing here?
I think anyone who's ever been tasked with reopening up a classroom or a school after 3 months of being closed and unused understands every year what an undertaking that is. And that's without all of the added components on top, which is completely disinfecting our buildings top to bottom, dealing with water systems and pipes to drinking fountains that haven't been touched or moved in 6+ months now. I think anyone who knows anything about operating a school building is alarmed at the idea of opening schools after this much time with them being untouched.
Doesn't that speak to it? And I'm not here to take shots at the folks, the worker bees, if you will, of all these schools, because most of the folks that I've met who do that type of work are passionate about it. They live for the kids. They do things on a daily basis that most of us wouldn't, and just in terms of the sheer physical effort to hold these buildings together. But what does it say to our leadership, in a sense, that these schools remain almost as tombs, if you will, to a day in which literally our entire world changed? That nothing apparently has been done.
Well, so school maintenance teams are amazing. And I'm talking about walking into school a month ago when I went back to my classroom. But I don't think that it's unrealistic that's to say right now that school maintenance teams across Rhode Island have been in buildings all summer painting and disinfecting and moving furniture and the laundry list of things is probably a mile long. So I don't think it's necessarily that our schools are a tomb since March. I don't want to undermine the work that all of our school maintenance teams have done since schools closed.
So where do we stand then? The governor backed away over the last few weeks. Governor backed away with her initial claim of a August 31st deadline to move forward with in-person education. We now have this magical mid-September deadline. From your experience in talking with people who work at all these schools, what progress has been made, and what are your concerns currently?
It's really hard to know. So I think it seemed initially like perhaps the governor was backing down, but I don't really think that the governor has ever backed down. I think that she moved the date to appease maybe some pressure from the union, maybe to acknowledge that schools just need extra time to get all of this logistical things figured out. But I feel like right now, one concern is just that schools are working with moving targets, right? That schools are trying to plan on school budgets that haven't been finalized or passed. That schools are trying to figure out what the safety metrics are when they change every day. And really, my biggest concern right now is that the safety guidance seems to be getting more and more lenient um, as we get closer to September 14th. So I know on Monday that Gina had mentioned her, whatever she's calling it, her Ed Doc Command Center thing with the National Guard, and that there will be building walkthroughs where everything will be inspected. The list that was released, the guidance that was released on August 24th, is the least strict guidance that I've seen thus far on classroom spacing and precautions and mitigation techniques. It says things like schools might consider addressing ventilation if they feel so inclined or if it's possible, but basically says that any classroom in Rhode Island that has one window has adequate ventilation to consider having students inside of it on September 14th. It also says things like students will share materials as little as possible. Well, we know in some districts that that's not, Central Falls right now is operating without a budget, right? Warwick is facing a $12 million deficit. We know that different districts are going to have different abilities to do these things that are stated as possible. So schools might consider doing daily temperature checks if they have the staff to do those. But there's no no school is going to fail these walkthroughs because it basically asks schools to do what's possible. And for some schools, 3 feet between desks even is not possible. 6 feet between desks is definitely not possible. But the way that the guidance reads, an inspector would just walk through, and if there's not 3 feet between desks, but there couldn't be, then that's fine.
Doesn't that defeat the purpose of everything this Everett has stood for since March?
Yes. So it's throwing in the garbage the 4+ months of work that we asked our contingency committees to do over the summer. It's to me, it feels like a slap in the face for all the work that we asked our superintendents to put into planning, that our school committees did with budgeting. Why have we been asked to be so creative with our budgets and moving mountains in our classrooms to meet these guidelines if on September 14th the guidelines, they don't matter?
Well, how is it possible?
What school is going to rent a tent if they can just have their desks 2 feet apart and say that that's what's possible?
Right, a tent that will work on an individual level, maybe through the middle of October. We're assured routinely by the governor, particularly if you go to these meetings and press conferences and Zooms, that the children will be safe. And yet the governor has started to hedge that in her public appearances with statements like, well, there will be outbreaks and then certain children will get sick. We all know that the big lie has been put to the notion that the children can't get sick, that somehow they're magically immune from this. Simply coming back together in some form after this long separation has put the lie to that. So why is the governor and why is the Department of Education insisting that our children will be safe while simultaneously admitting that they can't be?
Your guess is as good as mine at this point. I think it baffles. It feels beyond reason. I know that the commissioner has been incredibly stern in the fact that she's protecting Rhode Island families. The commissioner lives in Central Falls, and Central Falls has over half of their population right now requesting distance learning that Central Falls can't currently provide to their families. So I just there's been no effort to even survey or poll families. So I don't know where that I don't it feels like they're just cherry picking things that serve their interest, and I'm not sure why their interest right now lies in reopening our school buildings when it's not safe.
And this is being acknowledged throughout. It's almost as it's an alternate reality. Every adult in the state is looking at each other and saying out loud, particularly if they're in a member of the union or they're part of the union leadership, that it can't possibly happen. Yet every week we're trundled into this ether, if you will, where we all walk out going, "Hey, I can't wait. This governor's got this under control. It's going to be safe." And I just have trouble understanding what the motivation is.
Yeah, I don't know, and I feel like every day everything changes. Like it's everything is a moving target right now, and it's so hard to get a sense of like what actual reality is. So for instance, there was that letter that the Providence Journal misreported as meaning that 8 districts were going to return to distance learning, when in all actuality, none of the districts had actually voted to do so yet. And then refused to change the headline for X number of hours while everybody in our community panicked. But so that letter was signed by 8 superintendents and union leaders and presidents and school committee leaders, whoever. And they have basically said that it would be impossible to reopen their school buildings if they wait until August 31st to hear the decision from the governor. But then you have the superintendent of Lincoln who sent an email to his families being like, "You must have misunderstood that letter. We're actually still opening with the same plans, and we'll let you know by after the governor makes their decision on August 31st." So it's just like everything that you think a district's headed one way, and then they're not. Everybody just is like in this weird stalemate situation where they're like, "Well, our plan was to have this many kids in a class, but kids are still enrolling for distance learning, so we don't even know how many kids are going to be in the building still. Our plan was for transportation to work this way, but we don't actually know how many bus drivers we have or what the National Guard's going to provide us with or how many kids actually need transportation yet." It's just like there's this we're not setting ourselves up for success in any way for any choice in September to be well funded or feasible even.
Right. We all know that Central Falls faces significant logistical and financial challenges in addressing the situation. Has anyone, to your knowledge, evoked any type of plan to accommodate this high level of requests for distance learning?
No, actually, it was just I have no confirmation of this other than people that attended the meeting, but there was a forum with students in Central Falls 2 days ago, and the superintendent basically said that they currently couldn't offer distance learning to as many families as wanted it because they just didn't have the staff to support both. And they are not the only district to say that. That was one of the things that came up, is just that asking schools to do this hybrid plan is really pressing schools in staffing needs, in budget needs. It's logistically and financially just impossible for a lot of our school districts to do.
At this point, you're looking at about 3 weeks to the latest deadline. If in fact the equipment wasn't installed months ago, at what point in time do they think they're going to be capable in school systems that have, basic existential challenges, accommodate what even in the best of conditions would be a technological feat?
Yeah. I just sat in on the Woonsocket school committee meeting, and like shout out to the Woonsocket school committee because they're going to take the state to task about sending their kids back to school. Like they have a plan. They're going to keep their kids safe in Woonsocket. But a part of their thing was that, one, they're hiring their own independent engineer to do the same walkthrough that the state's going to do because they want an unbiased walkthrough of their schools. And it's too bad that we can't trust our state to do that. And secondly, that they acknowledged that even though they had in process all of these plans to like clean and fix their ventilation systems, that there was no way that that was going to be done by September 14th. Like it's the materials won't be there, like the work orders are not going to be completed to do those things by September 14th. So just the idea that all of these walkthroughs that have to happen before September 14th, that things could be ready by then, is insane. But then again, the walkthroughs are using these guidance that just say when possible, when feasible. So really, classrooms just need a window, even though superintendents were at this meeting that went through all of these different levels of air filtration systems, and it became like this huge thing that schools needed to figure out and fund and do. And now all of a sudden we receive this guidance that's for the walkthrough, just do what's possible.
So in a sense, real sense, do nothing. Because
in a real sense, do nothing. We've heard you say that you can't do anything, so now the guidance is do nothing.
Boy, they showed us. And there really is no possibility. I know I keep coming back to the same sort of point because I'm sort of in shock. We knew what needed to be done at some level in March, didn't we? If we wanted to return to classroom learning.
Yeah, I mean the Providence schools, that information about their ventilation system came out with the Johns Hopkins report, which predates COVID altogether. So in some sense, you would have had to have lived under a rock in Rhode Island to not know that our schools were in need of serious repair. And it's unfortunate that a pandemic has forced. Maybe it's fortunate that a pandemic has forced our hand. But here we are, and there's not a school committee or a state leader who could say that they weren't aware.
Right, because in politics, Ronald Reagan came up with the concept of it being the big lie. And if the big lie is repeated enough, then it becomes truth. And so the big lie has been that, even as time grows shorter and shorter and shorter, that it'll be fine. Everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that's just, and I'd love you to speak to this, because what folks are focusing on is something that they have a clear understanding of, which is, what it takes to make, in a sense, in a global sense, to make a classroom safe for learning, if you will, and what physical tasks have to be performed in order to, quote unquote, make it safe. Air filtration, distancing, barriers, all of that. No one's really addressing to me what the real challenge is, which is curriculum, technique, assignments, all the nuts and bolts of actually teaching. Now I know that anecdotally, some school systems have provided some level of training for teachers, whether it be Google Classroom or any one of a variety of applications. But you're a professional. You're a dedicated teacher with experience now. If they were to put together a perfectly safe environment, would you feel comfortable engaging in the techniques that you're going to have to use in this new reality for teaching? I guess in some cases simultaneously in person and distance. Has there been enough time to adjust to that?
There's never a perfectly safe school environment, right? And I've had a bunch of disagreements with people who are like, well, I guess we just don't agree on what safe means. Well, it's never going to be safe to go back. There's always a risk inherent in going to school. And yes, that's absolutely true. But we can't pretend that the risk level today is the same as it was on February 1st. I haven't even thought, I can't even wrap my brain around the teachers who are going to be asked to do simultaneous in-person learning and distance learning at the same time. I'm not one of those teachers, luckily, so I haven't had to think about it. It's something that's not getting enough attention at all. I have no idea how teachers are going to do that or how I would do that. There was an interesting picture today on the internet of a teacher behind a glass partition. And it was from here, I'm supposed to teach 18 students in front of me while simultaneously being filmed to deliver virtual instruction to 12 students at home. And I think that's going to be something that we figure out on September 15th that we haven't spent enough time addressing.
So on a physical level, we all know that they're not ready. On a I'll call it a transactional level, the actual class style engagement of students, both in person and distant. Not for the lack of effort by teachers. I'm married to a teacher who spent the entire summer, so much for that 9-month-a-year job, right? Has spent the entire summer attempting to relearn how she's taught children very successfully at a very high level for 30 plus years. And again, I don't want to diminish the efforts of a lot of very hardworking people who've done everything they can as teaching professionals, as IT and tech professionals, as well as people who run the schools on the hyper-local level. But at the same time, is it realistic to expect that can come off, even remotely effectively?
No, I mean, so there are some interesting opinions about that, right? So like the founder of Khan Academy and like a few different people I've seen have come out and said, virtual learning is completely possible. It's been possible. It's lived in these places. And maybe for some kids, right, that it could be just as effective as in-person instruction. But I don't disagree with the governor or anyone else saying that in-person instruction is what our kids deserve and need. I think my argument is just that if kids needed to be in school, then we should have shut down bars and beaches instead of prioritizing opening those things at the expense of being where we are now and not having school safety be at the forefront of our decision making for the past 4 months.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on Gina's latest suggestion about? And the one thing I could say is we are on the bleeding edge, at least, of discussing all the variety of implementation models. We are the best at PowerPoint, I think, of any state educational department. They put together a hell of a PowerPoint. I got to give them credit. It's very attractive and very engaging. Does any of this bear any relation to reality? And this latest Tiger team, for lack of a better term, she always uses that term, incorporating the National Guard, incorporating this. Does that make sense to you as a teacher?
No. I think I've seen multiple people be like, "What? Say more! Like, what is the National Guard doing? Are they driving the buses? Are they finding the buses? Are they doing the walkthroughs? Are they in schools? Are they like?" Maybe she has a plan. I don't know what it is, so I can't speak to the efficacy of it. But I can't imagine that the National Guard is going to come in and fix the myriad of obstacles that superintendents and school committees have named in facing reopening.
I have this mental image of children being picked up by 8 Humvees around Rhode Island, and they'll have the time of their life getting to school.
Yeah, hilarious, until you just remember that the National Guard is who Gina deployed at our protest that our children watched some of their families and parents be confronted by at the State House, right? So not that funny for Gina to involve the National Guard in our education system right now.
Well, it's not funny to involve the National Guard in just about everything in this country right now.
No.
It's the universal go-to. So here's what we've accomplished so far. We understand that it's there's an old TV series called The A-Team, and it was pretty bad TV. Mr. T was in it. That's all I'm going to say. Google it. There was a moment in every show where the head of the A-Team said, "I love it when a plan comes together." So let's look at the variety of plans. We still don't have any idea or understanding how children are going to get back and forth to school. We still have no understanding how they're going to maintain the integrity of these pods. We still have no understanding as to what type of curriculum they're really going to pursue. I got the stern glance in the lecture when I dared mention the word RICAS at the press conference and asked, was anyone talking to the Federal Department of Education and thinking about postponing RICAS, because I dared utter the unimaginable, which is mention the teaching to the test. At which point I got the death glare, because we don't teach to the test, we teach to the standards. Okay.
Never.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm grasping at straws here because I think the totality of this conversation is this: if you're me, because you've been on top of this the entire time. You're intimately involved in watching these groups move together. Is the horror that I'm coming to understand is that there is simply no there at any level whatsoever.
No, and I think that these problems are going to continue to unpack as the school year moves on right now. So right now, everybody is so focused on that date of September 14th. But in all actuality, no matter what happens, like 100% remote learning or back to school or whatever, there are still implications that haven't been addressed. So one of those things, right, and Massachusetts is always ahead of us in everything. So there are people in Massachusetts already thinking ahead to these things. But for instance, teacher evaluations what is the deal with teacher evaluations next year? How is that going to be effective and or fair to the teachers who are being evaluated next year? Moratoriums on RICAS. There are groups in Massachusetts suggesting that happens for the next 3 years. One, just to gain back the instructional time, because RICAS is not just 3 days. Any teacher in the state will tell you that it is like a month of instructional time, and that you race to get through all of your curriculum by the time that RICAS comes, which is in like May, and so you've taught what there is to teach by it's a huge chunk of instructional time that could be restored by putting a moratorium on RICAS. And the amount of money that we pay towards RICAS, it's just the high stakes testing conversation is coming in our state.
Right, because there's no way in hell that you can adequately represent through high stakes testing what type of learning is going to take place this year. Because I believe that between curriculum differences, practical differences, the ability of individual school systems to deliver an education based on a whole series of economic challenges, I mean, how can you draw any conclusions? How is there any way that RICAS will be a valid measurement of virtually anything?
Well, honestly, you could have said that last year too. You could have said that any year. All of those things have always applied.
No, I get that. And, believe me, I get that. Which is why this is the second or third time that I've personally asked the superintendent to explain where and what and how RICAS can even happen. And each time she has dismissed it because it's simply the law and it must happen. Wow. And so take it the next step down the road. So we don't understand how we're going to keep children actually safe according to their standards. We don't understand now how or what the priority is going to be in terms of curriculum. There are a whole bunch of people arguing for what I argued for a month ago, which is let's just focus on reading and writing and really in the fundamentals. But again, then you get into the RICAS barrier. Let me ask you, what if we understand how strongly and legitimately you feel about the physical aspects of bringing people together. As a teacher, explain to folks what grade you teach and what you think should be conducted in the quote loosely referred to as a classroom for the year ending in June 2021.
Oh, sure. So I teach fourth grade at a public charter school in Central Falls, and I think probably my take on what should happen inside of a classroom on any given year is there are probably gaps between what I think should happen in a classroom on any given year and what maybe the majority of people agree should happen in a classroom in any given year. But I think in terms of like what my grade level team is planning to do, it's really looking at like what are the major content strands that need to be covered, and how can we narrow it down to the most major content so that our students are as prepared as they can be for the next year of learning. So that's one piece of it content wise. And I think the other piece is just being responsive to the current situation. Like you can't just press forward with curriculum and ignore the myriad of social issues happening right now. So I think it's being responsive, planning ahead of time how to be responsive to students, and also planning what major content you're going to get to, and then how you're going to address content that's getting left out. So we're really talking about, well, if we're not going to get to this reading unit, how can we make sure that those reading standards live in the read alouds that we do with our kids? if we're not going to be able to get to this math content, how can we make sure that we at least expose kids to it? What's the fastest way of assessing students? How can we make sure that students who missed things last year are still accessing grade level content? Yeah, so it's a huge conversation. But my take is that you focus on the major content, and you kind of let everything else fall to the wayside. You address it the best you can.
And if children can walk away from this class year with improved reading skills and improved fundamental writing skills, and particularly in an area that's so troubling for Rhode Island, improved mathematics skills at the basic level, can we consider that a win? I certainly would.
I don't think we're even going to know if that happened, right? I think that there's not anybody who pretends to know whether distance learning was a failure or success last year in terms of academics is lying, because there's not data on that. We have no idea what kids learned or didn't learn at the end of last year. We know what we covered in our particular classrooms or school districts, but no one in Rhode Island or in the country can pretend to know what kids did or didn't know last year. So yeah, it would be a success if kids hopefully walked away learning something, but who knows? But that's true whether we go back to school or not. Just because we open our school door, I think that people are like, distance learning is not the education that we expect for our children, right? Like that's not enough of an education. It doesn't match what I know about good teaching practice, but neither does the way that we would return to schools, right? So like best teaching practice is without a doubt group work, whole class meeting time, close one-on-one conferencing with kids, small group interventions. Those things are not going to be happening in in-person schools. So I think no matter what happens next year, we're going to be facing a group of students who is just not it's just not feasible to give our kids in the best instruction as we know it from years prior, no matter the return scenario.
One of the issues that hasn't been discussed and was brought up by a member of the media in town this past week is the security issue. The conversation revolving around education in what now appears to be a distant time, about a year to 2 years ago, particularly after the Parkland shooting, seems to have been lost in all this. This state was gripped by the need to provide additional security at the classroom level. And I'm certainly not going to diminish that. Absolutely gripped. We had extensive conversations publicly about school resource officers. There was a great deal of controversy surrounding the ability of parents to be armed on campus. There was analysis of whether or not retired military personnel should be enabled. There was conversations nationwide and in Rhode Island about whether teachers, if they wanted to volunteer, to be trained in firearms and act as an additional level of security, should do so.
I remember that.
Right. Now, and to this person's credit, he pointed out, we're talking about tents. We're talking about, sitting under the elm tree like days of yore, the one-room schoolhouse. Again, everything that we have focused on for the last few years, we are just tossing out the window. Is there any concern from your experience as someone who's intimately involved in this controversy about security?
I'll be honest with you, that's not my favorite conversation. I think mostly because it's so far removed. Yes, that's a problem, right? That's an issue. That's definitely up there with something that could happen when kids are outside learning. But so one of the logical flaws of that argument is that we bring kids outside in school all the time, right? So yes, our classrooms do have security measures, but by and large, our kids are at recess without those security measures. I walk my kids down the street to the library without those security measures. So kids are outside without those security measures. That's not new. And I don't think that's the biggest flaw of the tent plan, right? Like, it is concerning. I totally hear that concern, and I worry about that too. But I think the Cranston superintendent really laid out the issues with the tent thing, and it's so much more immediate than the idea that there could be a situation like Parkland, right? So Cranston has 11,000, I think, students, and they were just noting that if they were to rent tents for their student body, that they would have to close down several major arteries in the city. It's just not, it's so not logistically impossible that worrying about what would happen if we were in tents is just so many, it's so many layers removed from reality for me that I can't have that conversation. We're not going to be, we can't be intense.
And yet they're essentially planning that, or talking about planning. I mean, are there enough, even enough tents in Rhode Island to as you mentioned, how many students in Cranston, the schools alone?
I mean, there are schools right now that have tents in their parking lot, right? That's their plan. And in the guidance, it says that if that plan is feasible for you, then you should explore the option of tents. I think the issue is that the majority of Rhode Island students go to school in our urban districts where that is not an option. And unfortunately, that runs along the same lines as where the COVID risks are the realest, right? So in our communities that have the least incidences of COVID, they are the most likely to have space and money to pitch tents. It makes that's one of those that just gets back to the guidance being institutionalized racism, and really a disservice to our schools, our student population in Rhode Island.
So you take the most challenged students who have to deal with the most challenging situations in the most challenged buildings, with who are completely challenged to have the resources to adapt or improvise at any level, and it's 3 weeks ago. What's the solution? Well, there is no solution. There is no good answer. But from your perspective, you folks were good enough to appear and attempt to communicate these issues and these solutions at outside the governor's press conference the other day. And the governor referred to your organization as people who are honking their horns, as opposed to a handful of people who are quote unquote concerned parents. I'm not trying to goad you when I say that. We spoke about this off air. Number one, your reaction to that, and number two, your organization is desperately working to communicate basic truths to people, absolute facts, and they don't seem at all interested in publicly acknowledge them. So what do we do?
I mean, from the beginning, the governor and the commissioner have both gone on record as saying, I mean, they haven't named us, but like have clearly been talking about us being misinformed, being fear mongers. And I don't think there's a person in Rhode Island that's more informed about a variety of school plans and school issues right now than I am, mostly because I eat, sleep, and dream it right now for the past month. I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who's been to more school committee meetings in the past 3 weeks than I have. So not misinformed, not fear mongering. I'm merely stating things that are facts. And it's unfortunate that it's being received that way. That's my reaction to that, and it's sad. And I think there is no good solution. The solution is so layered and would involve the cooperation of so many of our elected officials that I think it's basically impossible at this point. But to me and to our organization, the best solution would be 3 months ago to have done a better job at mitigating COVID, right? But that time has passed. So now in our current situation with our current numbers, it's to listen to the most stringent guidelines from the Harvard Global Health Institute, which names Rhode Island as all 5 counties, risk level red, must return to remote learning. I don't know why we feel comfortable or justified ignoring that guidance. But for me, we return kids to distance learning in the name of safety. And then the commissioner is absolutely right that families are choosing between going to work and putting food on their table, leaving their kids at home. That's an issue that needs to be solved. I don't think the solution is that we send our kids back into school buildings. I think the solution is that we stimulus packages, better unemployment, that we have an eviction moratorium. And there are just so many other things that we could do to address those concerns for families that aren't just, I hate to use her term, but like the guidance that they issued on Monday is throwing in the towel. Like it literally says, do what's possible. Good luck to you all. Open your school doors. Like Yeah. So I have dreams about what a better solution could be, but I have very little hope that anybody with any power to make those decisions is going to make them in the next 3 weeks.
Meanwhile, parents are voting with their feet, aren't they? I mean, you've got an overwhelming response to, in terms of parents seeking to remain in some level of distance learning. Um, do you think that we've got an accurate picture of how many parents are electing to that at this point? And if so, what is that?
No. It's even so these deadlines that schools set for parents opting in to distance learning range from anywhere from August 7th. How could you imagine having to make a decision on August 7th for whether or not you wanted your kid to go back to school or not? So that's one issue, right? Is that parents are being forced to make this school choice, which there's questions about whether that's even like a legally binding school choice, but schools need to ask parents to make these decisions so that schools can plan. They can't make a plan if they don't know how many kids are going to be where, right? That's the issue with hybrid. That's one of the issues with hybrid learning. And secondly, parents don't even know what they're opting into. Like many school districts, like Providence, for instance, with their virtual learning academy, like have not even explained to families that by enrolling in distance learning, you're unenrolling your student from their homeschool. And that varies from district to district. So the state can't answer that question. The state is not answering that question, and it's falling to superintendents and school districts to one, figure out while this is happening, what is distance learning going to be? Who is going to teach it? Will it be classroom teachers? How many classroom teachers do we need? And then there is no information to communicate to families, but we're asking them to make a decision about it, and it's just it's wild and it's wrong on so many levels. Um, yeah.
If you're not a teaching professional in the state, and if you're someone peering in, you've got children, maybe you don't. You're looking at, for many of us, the belief that the real work is being done at the superintendent level, and there's this PR effort appearing at the top level, and that to a certain degree, the superintendents have been just left out there to figure it out on their own. Now that's, as an outsider, is that a fair representation? Do you believe what's actually happening?
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's absolutely what's happening by the state, right? That it was like up to the LEAs to come up with these impossible plans, and if they didn't, or if they decided that the thing that they were asked to do, it's right. Like the governor gave them an assignment and didn't give them adequate materials to do the assignment, and is then shaming the children who were like, "Hey, governor, we cannot complete this assignment that you gave us. We don't have the materials." Um, so yeah, they were definitely left out to dry. I think that I don't just think that it's superintendents though that have a responsibility to speak up about that, and it's so great that those 8 superintendents did and sent that letter. I think that's a start, but I also think that by and large, our school committees across Rhode Island don't all I don't know what verb to use, understand their job as school committee members, and that they really have a place and a space in this conversation, um, and that they need to stand with their superintendents. The superintendent should not be standing alone versus the state right now.
Wow. You don't sound optimistic.
No, I'm not optimistic. I sat in on an East Providence school. I live in East Providence, and I sat in on the East Providence school committee meeting last night, and I should not have been disappointed, but I was.
So many school boards are made up of well-meaning, hardworking, caring individuals. Yet at the same time, these folks are not educational professionals. You certainly learn on the fly. A lot of these folks do a lot of work at getting up to speed on the issues, but clearly they are not teaching professionals. They understand the fundamentals of the curriculum. Is too much weight being placed, if you will, analogous to the question I had about the superintendents? Are these school boards being left out, in a sense, to dry in the same manner?
I think it's one of those things where it's an issue that existed before COVID, and now we're unfortunately in the place where the issue existed and now it matters, right? So, like our school committees, and I'm gonna say, like, I sat in on the Woonsocket school committee meeting tonight, and I have never sat through a Woonsocket school committee meeting because I don't live in Woonsocket. I don't teach in Woonsocket. Um, but I sat through that school committee meeting tonight, and I will say that I was impressed with their school committee, right? So I'm not speaking for all school committees, but I think when I last night, my public comment to these Providence School Committee was a reminder that their job is to pass policy and practice that protects the wellness and health of their students and school staff. Um, and the response that I got from school committee members that was actually the job of their union leaders. Um, and I, I I don't think we keep a careful enough eye on what our school committees are intended to do. I don't any of our elected officials are intended to do, and whether or not they actually hold true to their constituency, that they even have a grasp on what their constituency actually thinks or believes. Yeah, no, I'm not hopeful about it in this moment.
Wow. Um,
Sorry, what a downer, right?
uh, you are Debbie Downer tonight. Wow. But here's why it's so important. You know, I'll spare you the usual cliches, but you're speaking simply the truth. And as a state, for the 30 plus years that I've lived here, we have been so manipulated. We have been so overly consulted. We have been fed so much nonsense that, my God, someone speaking the truth is revelatory. It just is. And so the fact that, as you've elaborated so elegantly tonight, there are no good answers, but here's at least a direction to take that may make really bad things quite not so bad, or maybe not so terrible. There's a maturity in that conversation that doesn't exist because we simply keep going back to Janet from Another Planet, here's the day that should have been. You know, do you read Janet from Another Planet? Do they still read that in schools? I'll get you a copy, okay? Because because the bunny in the Bunny Planet, they have a terrible day, but at the end of the day, they can all gram together and hold hands and say, "Here's the day that should have been." Well, we don't get to do that in the real world, do we? Sadly. Yet there's this constant reliance on optimism. I guess if I walk away every week from this press conference, and I guess we're going to be treated to 4 or 5 brief ones this week about the educational system, is the notion that somehow this euphemism that we're working hard and we're planning, it substitutes for hard decisions and substitutes for actual performance in this current version of Rhode Island state government is possibly the most appalling, because we are just to take it at surface value that people are working hard. You know, it's like when you listen to a political ad, I'm going to fight for you. What does that mean? I'm working hard. I don't doubt for a moment that most of the people in Rhode Island state government aren't working hard. But if it's to cross purposes, if it's to poorly developed expectations and goals, and there's no effective roadmap, for lack of a better term, then working hard can be really dangerous. Because
I think we're depleting the few educational resources that we have, right? Like, our best educational resource right now in Rhode Island is our teachers and school leaders. And by asking them to spend their summer engaging in this impossible work and then shaming and belittling them when it turns out to be impossible, it's just depleting the one resource that we have left to give to our kids in the fall.
And on a closing note, if you could, again, as a teacher who knows teachers of multiple generations, multiple skill levels, multiple, if you will, subject matters, explain to folks, if you will, the real fear that many of your hardworking teaching professionals have right now, the fear they had at the beginning of the summer, and now the fear that the reality that they're facing. Is there any way you can put words to that for people?
Sure. I think it's a misunderstanding to think that the thing that teachers are afraid of is getting sick. or the thing that teachers are afraid of is even their kids getting sick. I think the thing that's scariest to me right now, and the thing that I lose sleep over, is whether or not I'm doing right by my kids. And I think no matter how we reopen schools, I'm going to wonder that. Um, and yeah, and I think right now for teachers, it's a balancing act of, the commissioner is not wrong that our students and families are facing challenges by being asked to stay at home, and and scientists are also not wrong that our students and families will face health challenges by being asked to go back into school buildings, and 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 as a teacher being tasked with deciding what feels right for not only myself and my family, which is one issue, but also just deciding what feels right to my students and having to question that, it is really hard. And in March, I wouldn't have batted an eyelash to say, oh yeah, I can be an effective educator online. And and even though all 22 of my families would say that they loved my distance learning in the spring, right, and would stand by me no matter what instructional decision I make in the fall, it's still really, I lose sleep over hearing my practice and my judgment and everything else called into question over and over and over, by literally every person with no skin in the game or experience at all right now. It's really, it's hard. It's hard right now. But I don't think it's just that teachers are scared of being sick. And I feel like the very real fears of teachers are being misinterpreted that way and minimized.
Thank you for that. I'm if you're not part of that, it's difficult to either A, understand, B, explain, or give words to it, because it's difficult to explain the connection teachers have with children. Because, quite frankly, if you don't have the skill set to be a teacher, I don't know that you'll ever have that special connection or have the ability to understand it. And so, it's an extension of a teacher's personality, their life, that special relationship they have with their kiddos. And we have so many armchair experts. We have so many Facebook PhDs who all understand what it means to teach a class, who understand the dilemmas facing the educational class, and yet I don't know if any of us really have any idea of what we're talking about if we're not immersed in it. I just don't know. And unfortunately, a lot of those people are the ones making the decisions. So how can people find out more about your organization? Give them the rundown where they can find you on social media, and if you've got any additional plans to demonstrate that you'd like to discuss publicly or not, or what type of profile you folks are going to take as we move forward, into the, if you will, into the field of battle, it feels like.
Oh my God, you caught me on a night where I'm fresh out of plans to move forward. But you can find us on social media. We're on Twitter at SafeReturnRI and on Instagram at SafeReturnRI. And our big push right now is for people to attend and make public comment at their local school committee meetings. That's good practice, no matter how you feel, no matter what your opinion is, even when we're not in a pandemic. You can find all of your local school committee meeting information, including the Zoom links and how to submit a public comment at www.tinyurl/ri-school-meetings. All that information has been compiled for you by yours truly, because we really are trying to make a push for school committees to, one, be a point of resistance to our state leaders, and two, for people in the public to use their school committees as forums to really enact some change in our schools.
It's really time. It's actually well past time, but it is very much time for parents, grandparents, community members to become one with their school committee, isn't it? I mean, it's a resource that's been underused by many, unknown by a lot, misunderstood by several, and yet that's the central meeting point of all these efforts, isn't it? So if we don't show up, let's just say this. This is my thought, not yours. If we only show up when we're threatening the football program, then as parents and as community members, we're frauds when we demand education and we demand educational reform, because it's the meeting grounds for all of this are school board meetings. And a lot of them aren't very interesting sometimes. There's a lot of policy in there, but it's the building blocks for all of this. So, if you could stress one more time that URL, so folks, particularly now since, they're all Zoomed. On one hand, for folks who routinely go to public meetings, there's a loss, if you will, of immediacy and contact in that environment. On the other hand, it makes them incredibly easy for parents who are very upset to really reach out and touch their school board. So if you can give us that link one more time, that's powerful.
I am team keep school committee meetings on Zoom for eternity. That is the best. I think that's one of the best things that came out of this pandemic. But the URL is www.tinyurl.com/ri-school meetings. And really, I think one other thing to watch for when you're at your school committee meeting is just what the qualifications are for being a school committee member. And hopefully it will inspire some more qualified persons to run for school committee in our local communities.
Right. Provide diversity both in background and experience. Well, Stephanie, again, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll come back again soon. You appear, as far as I'm concerned, about the only person I can actually ask a question to and get an answer. And it might not be an answer that I understood or expected, but there's an amazing amount of truth and expertise in that, and a lot of that comes with your organization's hard work. So I hope you'll join us again, and just keep the fight alive. It seems like they're on a they're on a pace to just run right over us. It's great to know that folks like you are out there providing reasoned opposition. We sure as hell need it now. So thanks again.
We're trying. Thank you so much for giving me a platform again, Pat. I appreciate it.
All right. Let's talk soon. Stephanie Muse, she has joined the coalition again, representing parents and teachers looking for the safe reopening of schools in this state, clearly advocating on behalf of distance learning, a reasonable approach to distance learning, where children from virtually every background, the diversity of backgrounds in this state, can have an opportunity to grow educationally this year, at the same time not be put in a position of risk, at the same time the staff and faculty not be put in a position of risk, and at the same time, we have a clearer understanding of what the facts are so that we can separate it from the public relations. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage-born free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty, mighty Twitter at coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. We'll be back tomorrow night with more programming. Take a moment, if you will, if you could like our Facebook page or maybe follow us on YouTube. It's the way that we can separate ourselves from the sort of white noise that's out there in independent media, and in particular the mainstream media, as we attempt to actually deliver here in long form facts. Have a wonderful night. Thank you.